Hi there, I'm a historian. If you're having trouble sleeping tonight, I think my story might just help you drift off. For now, all you need to do is close your eyes. And if you have headphones nearby, go ahead and put them on. Let my voice, and the sound of rain, carry you gently into sleep. Now then, let's begin. When we sift through the grand tapestry of medieval history, our eyes often fixate on the glittering threads of kings and queens' knights, and ladies' battles and coronations. We imagine a world of clear-cut roles where love and power danced a predictable minuet within the confines of marriage and dynastic alliances. But history, bless its mischievous heart, rarely fits neatly into our neat little boxes. Like an old mansion with countless hidden passages and forgotten rooms, the past holds secrets that defy our modern assumptions, and few are as quietly intriguing or as subtly tragic as the lives of those who occupied the role of male concubine. Now pause for a moment and let that word, concubine, settle. For most of us, it conjures an immediate image, a woman often beautiful, perhaps exotic, living in a gilded cage within a powerful man's household, a figure of luxury and subservience. It's a vision shaped by centuries of romanticized tales and Orientalist paintings, a trope as old as time itself. But what if we told you that the concept to the role of concubine was not always confined to the feminine? What if the velvet curtains of history sometimes concealed a male figure equally bound by the whims of power, equally precarious in his position, yet almost entirely erased from our collective memory? This is not a tale of simple same-sex relationships as we understand them today, but rather a complex exploration of power dynamics, social norms, and the often unspoken arrangements that shaped the lives of individuals in a world far removed from our own. Across the vast and varied landscape of the Middle Ages, from the sun-baked courtyards of Islamic Spain to the misty, often brutal keeps of European nobility, and even further east to the opulent courts of mighty empires, the human heart and the human need for companionship, affection, and even political leverage found outlets that defied simple categorization. While the concept of a harem in the popular imagination is almost exclusively female, history whispers of invisible harems, where young men, sometimes boys, were brought into the inner sanctums of powerful figures. These were not always relationships of love, nor were they always relationships of pure exploitation. They were often a bewildering blend of both, seasoned with a heavy dose of political expediency and social maneuvering. Consider the courts of the Islamic world, particularly during the Abbasid Caliphate, or in Moorish Spain. Here, the presence of male favorites, often young and beautiful, was not entirely uncommon. They might be poets, musicians, scholars, or simply companions. Their roles were multifaceted, sometimes blurring the lines between cherished friend, intellectual peer, and something more intimate. They were often showered with gifts, granted positions of influence, and became integral parts of the courtly fabric. Yet their status was inherently fragile, dependent entirely on the favor of their patron. They lacked the legal protections of a wife, the dynastic importance of an heir, or the established lineage of a noble. Their existence was a testament to the fluid nature of power and desire, a delicate bloom sustained only by the sun of their patron's attention. Shift your gaze to the rougher, colder climes of medieval Europe. While overt male concubinage was far less institutionalized and certainly not openly celebrated, whispers and veiled references in chronicles suggest that such relationships were not entirely absent. Powerful lords, dukes, and even some churchmen, in an age where marriage was often a cold, calculated political contract, sometimes sought comfort and companionship outside the rigid confines of their official lives. These relationships, if they existed, would have been shrouded in absolute secrecy carrying the immense risk of scandal, excommunication, or even death. Unlike their counterparts in some Eastern courts, who might have enjoyed a degree of open acknowledgement, European male favorites would have existed in the deepest shadows, their lives a constant tightrope walk over an abyss of social ostracism. Their tragedy was perhaps even more profound, born of the necessity of absolute concealment. Then there are the vast Eastern empires, where the lines between male concubine Eunice and trusted advisor could become incredibly intricate. In some imperial courts, young men were brought in for their beauty, their talents, or simply to serve as companions. Their roles could range from purely aesthetic to highly influential acting as intermediaries, spies, or even de facto ministers. The spectrum of their positions was as broad as the human experience itself. Some were indeed political pawns traded or offered as tokens of submission or alliance, their bodies and futures sacrificed on the altar of power. Others might have been genuinely cherished, elevated to positions of immense trust and affection. Their lives intertwined with the very fabric of the court. And then there were those whose relationships with their patrons blurred into something resembling pederasty, a practice that, while morally reprehensible by modern standards, was viewed with varying degrees of acceptance or condemnation across different historical periods and cultures. It is an uncomfortable truth, but one that cannot be ignored when examining the complex tapestry of these relationships. Or perhaps it was a mentor-student dynamic that deepened into an emotional and physical bond. A quiet understanding shared between two souls in a world that offered few avenues for genuine connection. The greatest challenge, and indeed a significant part of their tragedy, lies in the sheer invisibility of these lives in the historical record. History, after all, is largely written by the victors, and often by those who adhere to the prevailing moral codes. Relationships that deviated from the heterosexual procreative norm were either ignored, condemned, or carefully obscured with euphemisms. A special friend, a trusted companion, a beloved page. These seemingly innocuous phrases might in fact be the only breadcrumbs left behind, hinting at a deeper, more intimate connection. It's like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a vast beach after a storm. The evidence is there, but scattered, disguised, and often intentionally buried. Scribes, chroniclers, and official historians were not in the business of documenting scandal or unconventional affections, especially if those affections involved powerful patrons. Their job was to uphold the image, to maintain the facade of order and righteousness. To openly record a male concubine would have been to invite moral outrage, political instability, or even accusations of heresy. So these lives became footnotes, whispers, or simply vanished into the ether of unwritten history. Their stories, if they were told at all, were told in hushed tones, behind closed doors, never committed to parchment for posterity. This deliberate erasure means that for every fleeting glimpse we catch, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives that remain utterly unknown, their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and their heartbreaks, forever lost to the sands of time. It's a bit like trying to piece together a grand symphony when all you have are a few scattered notes played on a broken instrument in a forgotten corner of a vast, echoing hall. The melody is there somewhere, but it requires an immense act of historical imagination to truly hear it. And that in itself is a profound sorrow. Finding these lost melodies. These ghost stories of the heart means delving into the scraps and whispers, piecing together a mosaic from fragments. It means recognizing that for every grand pronouncement of a medieval king, there was a quiet, unwritten life, unfolding in the shadows, a life often just as complex, just as filled with longing and ambition, but almost entirely dependent on the fickle favor of the powerful. And nowhere was this dependence more pronounced, this existence more precarious, than for the male concubine or beloved male favorite, whose gilded cage, no matter how sumptuously appointed, was still at its core a prison of gilded bars. Imagine, if you will, the daily dawn in a sprawling medieval court. For most, the day was a predictable dance of duties, prayers, meals, and perhaps a bit of jousting or hunting, if you were of the knightly persuasion. But for the young man who occupied that peculiar space of male favorite, the morning light brought a different kind of uncertainty. He might awaken in chambers far grander than his birthright suggested, perhaps even adjacent to the royal bedchamber itself. The silks on his bed, the warmth of the furs, the intricate carvings on the furniture, all spoke of immense luxury. Servants, likely more numerous than those attending a minor noble, would cater to his every whim, from his morning ablutions to the selection of his elaborate garments. Food rich and plentiful would be brought to him, a feast fit for a king's companion. These were the perks, the visible trappings of his unique position, a golden handshake, with fate that seemed on the surface to offer limitless comfort and ease. But beneath this shimmering veneer of privilege lay a churning sea of anxiety. Every gift, every lavish meal, every moment of close proximity to his patron was a reminder of his utter dependency. He owned nothing in the true sense beyond the clothes on his back and the trinkets in his chest. His wealth was borrowed, his status reflected like a moonbeam on a lake. He might hold a title, perhaps a ceremonial office like Master of the Horse, or Keeper of the Privy Seal, positions that granted access and a veneer of respectability. But strip away the trappings, and he was fundamentally a creature of patronage. His entire existence was predicated on maintaining the favor of the one person who mattered most. It was a bit like being a magnificent kite, soaring high and proud, but knowing full well that the string holding you aloft could be snipped at any moment, sending you tumbling back to earth. The daily routine of such an individual was a delicate ballet of observation and anticipation. His role was to be present, pleasing, and perceptive. He needed to understand his patron's moods, anticipate their desires, and offer counsel or companionship precisely when needed. It was a high-stakes performance with no written script. Was the monarch troubled by a political rival? The favorite needed to offer soothing words or perhaps distract with witty banter. Was the lord restless or bored entertainment, whether in the form of music poetry or a game of chess, was expected? The favorite was in essence a living, breathing emotional thermostat, constantly adjusting to the climate of the patron's disposition. This constant vigilance took an immense psychological toll. Imagine living every moment of every day with the knowledge that one misstep, one ill-chosen word, one moment of perceived disloyalty could shatter your world. The whispers of the court, the jealous glances of disgruntled nobles, the machinations of rivals, all contributed to an atmosphere of pervasive paranoia. He was often the subject of intense scrutiny, not just from his patron, but from every ambitious courtier hoping to usurp his place or glean some favor through him. It was like living in a grand echoing hall, where every conversation might contain a coded warning, every glance a potential threat. Adding to this pressure was the profound isolation. While surrounded by servants and courtiers, genuine companionship was a rare commodity. Who could he truly trust? Who genuinely cared for him beyond his proximity to power? Fellow courtiers might feign friendship, but their loyalty would shift with the prevailing winds of courtly favor. Family, if he had any, might see him as a means to an end, a conduit to wealth or influence for their own aspirations. He was often an outsider, elevated above his peers, but never truly integrated into the established hierarchies of power and lineage. He was a supernova, burning brightly, but alone, knowing his light was temporary. And unlike a legitimate wife, who at least had the status of her marriage, or a child who carried the promise of an inheritance, the male favorite possessed no such legal standing. He had no rights beyond what his patron chose to bestow. If the patron died, or worse, simply lost interest, the favorite's world could crumble overnight. The lavish gifts could be reclaimed, the positions revoked, the servants dispersed. He might find himself cast out from the warm embrace of the court into the harsh reality of poverty, without the social safety nets that might catch a disgraced noble or a widowed lady. His fate was entirely in the hands of another, a stark reality that must have haunted his every waking moment. Consider the tragedy inherent in this lack of legitimate status. A noble's son had his family name lands and a clear path, however challenging. A daughter had her dowry and the promise of a strategic marriage. But the male favorite often came from humbler origins, plucked from obscurity by a powerful patron. His rise was meteoric, but his fall could be equally swift and absolute. He was a brilliant comet, blazing across the night sky, destined to disappear as suddenly as he appeared, leaving little trace. In some cases, the tragic end wasn't just disfavor or poverty, but a far grimmer fate. Historical accounts, though scarce and often veiled, hint at favorites who, once their star waned, faced exile, forced monasticism, or even execution. Their knowledge of courtly secrets, their proximity to power, could make them dangerous liabilities once their usefulness or desirability faded. The very intimacy that once secured their position could become the reason for their demise. Imagine knowing too much, having seen behind the curtain, and realizing that your life now depends on the silence you cannot truly guarantee. The golden cage then becomes a death trap. The stories of these individuals, when they survive at all, are often filtered through the lens of disapproval or outright condemnation by later chroniclers. Their lives were deemed scandalous, morally ambiguous, and thus carefully airbrushed from the official narrative. It's as if a great historical editor, armed with a giant eraser, systematically scrubbed away anything that didn't fit the prevailing image of medieval virtue. This silencing of their stories is in itself a profound tragedy, denying them a voice, a place in the grand narrative of human experience. They are the unnamed, the unlamented, the ghosts in the courtly machine, their hearts and hopes swept under the opulent rugs of history. And yet their absence speaks volumes, a testament to the complex, often contradictory emotional landscapes that existed even in the most seemingly rigid of historical periods. Their very disappearance from the spotlight illuminates the precariousness of their existence, the profound lack of agency that defined their days, and the tragic inevitability of their downfall once the fickle finger of fate or their powerful patron decided their time in the sun had come to an end. Even when their lives weren't cut tragically short, the sudden departure from favor was a kind of death in itself, a social demise as absolute as any physical one. One day, you might be at the very epicenter of power, basking in the glow of a king's smile. Your opinions sought, your presence desired. The next, you might find yourself abruptly out in the cold, your gilded key to the inner sanctum mysteriously no longer fitting the lock. The reasons for such a precipitous fall from grace were as varied and unpredictable as the medieval weather. Sometimes it was a simple matter of shifting affections, for even the most powerful heart could prove as fickle as a spring breeze. A new face might appear at court, younger, more charming, or simply possessing a novel allure that captured the patron's wandering eye. And just like that, yesterday's favorite became today's forgotten memory, a discarded toy in the royal nursery. But often the reasons were far more complex and insidious, woven into the intricate tapestry of courtly politics. A favorite, by virtue of their proximity to power, inadvertently accumulated enemies faster than a snowball rolling downhill. Ambitious rivals, jealous family members of the patron, or even simply courtiers who resented the favorite's perceived influence and lack of traditional lineage, would scheme relentlessly. They would whisper venomous gossip, concoct elaborate slanders, or subtly undermine the favorite's standing in the patron's eyes. A seemingly innocent comment could be twisted into a grave insult, a loyal action reinterpreted as treasonous ambition. It was a game of invisible daggers, and the favorite lacking a strong independent power base was often the easiest target. Imagine the sheer terror of realizing your world is beginning to unravel. Perhaps the patron's glance is a little colder, their voice a little sharper. Invitations to private chambers cease. Gifts once showered upon, you are now bestowed upon someone else. The court, that buzzing hive of gossip and observation, would pick up on these subtle shifts with terrifying speed. The very people who once bowed lowest or sought your ear would now avert their gaze, their smiles suddenly strained like old shoes too tight for comfort. The warmth of the sun that had sustained you would begin to recede, leaving you shivering in an ever-lengthening shadow. It was a slow, agonizing realization that the ground beneath your feet was turning to quicksand. The abruptness of their dismissal could be truly shocking. There were no severance packages in the Middle Ages, no polite notices or retirement plans. One day you were in, the next you were out often with little more than the clothes on your back. Your chambers would be stripped, your personal guards reassigned, your access to court blocked. It was a complete and utter rupture, a public humiliation designed to send a clear message. This individual was no longer favored, no longer protected, no longer to be acknowledged. It was a bit like being a splendid tapestry suddenly ripped from the wall, leaving only a blank, dusty patch where beauty once hung. The common fates awaiting these fallen stars were grim. One frequent outcome was exile. Banished from court, often from the entire kingdom, the former favorite would be forced to flee, sometimes with mere hours' notice. Stripped of their wealth and connections, they would face a desperate struggle for survival in a world that had little pity for the disgraced. Imagine a person who has known nothing but luxury, who has been waited on hand and foot, suddenly thrust into a life of poverty and anonymity, relying on charity or their wits to avoid starvation. For someone accustomed to the delicate dance of courtly intrigue, the brutal realities of the common road would have been a profoundly shocking and terrifying experience. They went from being the whispered-about center of attention to being nobody, an anonymous speck in a vast, indifferent landscape. Another popular, if equally cruel fate, was forced monasticism. Forcing a former favorite into a monastery or convent served multiple purposes. It removed them from court, silenced them behind stone walls, and perhaps most importantly for the patron's image, offered a semblance of spiritual redemption for what might have been considered a scandalous past. It was a way to sanitize the narrative, to tuck away the inconvenient truth under a cowl and shroud. For a young man accustomed to the vibrant, often sensual world of the court, a life of silent contemplation, harsh discipline, and celibacy would have been an excruciating torment. Their days would be filled with prayer and labor, their nights with the ghosts of a life they could no longer touch. It was a living death, a slow suffocation of the spirit, designed to ensure they could never again pose a threat or cause embarrassment. And then, for some, the ultimate tragedy awaited execution. This was often reserved for favorites who had amassed significant political power, who knew too many secrets, or who were perceived as a genuine threat to the patron's authority or the stability of the realm. Their intimate knowledge of the court, their personal understanding of the powerful, made them dangerous loose ends. Killing them was the most absolute form of silencing a brutal declaration that their story, their influence, their very existence was to be irrevocably terminated. These were not always public spectacles. Often they were quiet, swift affairs, a body disappearing in the night, a silent warning to any who might consider overstepping their bounds. The speed and finality of such a fate underline the inherent danger of their positions. The higher you climbed, the further you had to fall, and sometimes that fall was into the executioner's basket. The most poignant aspect of their tragic downfall is how thoroughly their stories were erased from history. Unlike fallen nobles, whose lineage and lands might still be recorded, or disgraced queens, whose political marriages often ensured their historical documentation, the male favorite simply ceased to exist in official records. Their names, if they were ever truly recorded as more than a fleeting presence, were scrubbed from chronicles. Their contributions, however significant, were attributed to others, or simply ignored. It was a deliberate act of historical airbrushing, a meticulous effort to remove any trace that such a figure had ever held sway. The collective memory of the court was encouraged to forget, and future generations were presented with a sanitized, less complicated past. This systematic silencing extends beyond just the official records. Their personal letters, if they wrote any, would have been destroyed. Their possessions would have been confiscated. Their very existence was deemed too inconvenient, too scandalous, or simply too insignificant to warrant remembrance. Imagine living a life of intense emotional and political drama, only for it to be collectively decided that you never truly existed, that your impact was negligible, that your loves and losses were unworthy of record. It's a profound violation, a final act of erasure that denies them even the dignity of historical recognition. They become footnotes to footnotes. Shadows of shadows their lives, a testament to the brutal efficiency with which the powerful could control not just the present, but also the narrative of the past. And that, more than any physical hardship, is the ultimate tragedy of their existence: to have lived, to have loved, to have influenced, only to be deemed unworthy of memory. Their stories linger only in the faint echoes between the lines of history, waiting for a curious ear to listen for the whispers of what was. Those echoes, faint as they might be, often reveal not just the lives of individuals, but the very mechanics of how medieval power truly operated. Because if certain relationships were kept secret, if certain figures were erased, then the courts themselves must have been master classes in discretion. Vast buzzing hives where secrets were the most valuable currency. In a world without telephones, without email, without even a reliable postal service for the common folk, how did the powerful communicate in whispers, send coded messages, or simply know who was truly on their side and who was merely pretending? This, my friends, was the fine art of courtly discretion, a skill more vital than sword fighting or tapestry weaving, and far more dangerous to get wrong. Imagine a medieval castle, not just as a stone fortress, but as a living, breathing organism of information. Every servant, from the scullery maid to the most trusted chamberlain, was a potential ear. Every noble visiting on diplomatic missions or simply seeking favor was a pair of eyes. The very architecture of the place, with its echoing halls and narrow passages, lent itself to both eavesdropping and clandestine encounters. Secrets were the lifeblood of power, and keeping them, or skillfully leaking them, was a full-time occupation. The code of conduct within these courts was unwritten but absolute. You learned quickly that what was said openly was rarely the full truth, and what was truly important was never spoken aloud in crowded rooms. A nod, a glance, a specific gesture with a goblet. These were the subtle grammar of power. A casual comment about the weather might actually be a veiled warning about a political storm brewing. A seemingly innocent invitation to a hunt could be a summons for a secret meeting. It was like living inside a vast, elaborate charade where everyone was both an actor and a detective, constantly trying to read between the lines of every interaction. The most trusted individuals, those closest to the monarch or powerful lord, became walking vaults of sensitive information. They knew who was secretly plotting who owed whom a favor and where the skeletons were buried in the family closet. Their discretion was paramount. A careless word, even to a seemingly harmless confidant, could unravel years of careful planning, spark a rebellion, or lead to someone's very swift exit from this mortal coil. It's no wonder that a person's ability to keep their mouth shut was valued perhaps even more highly than their military prowess or their noble lineage. Loose lips, as the saying, almost certainly went sunk medieval ships of state. Sometimes the need for secrecy led to the formation of actual secret societies or clandestine networks within the royal household itself. While not always as dramatic as the Hollywood portrayals of hooded figures meeting in torchlit crypts, these were often informal yet powerful groups united by shared loyalties, ambitions, or dangerous knowledge. Think of the hushed gatherings in a hidden antechamber where trusted advisors might discuss matters too sensitive for the main council. Or perhaps a cabal of knights bound by oaths not just to their liege, but to each other, sharing intelligence and coordinating actions in the monarch's name, or sometimes in their own. Rumors, for instance, often swirled around groups like the Knights Templar, whose immense wealth and independent power made them an object of both awe and suspicion. While their stated purpose was religious and military, the very secrecy of their rituals and their widespread network fueled whispers of hidden agendas and powerful influence behind the scenes. Were they a formal secret society pulling strings across Europe? Or were they just a very well-organized, very rich, and very private military order? The very mystery was part of their power, a testament to the effectiveness of discretion on a grand scale. Even more common were less formal, but equally potent networks of informants and spies. Every major court had its spy masters, its quiet watchers, its individuals who gathered intelligence through seemingly innocuous conversations or by simply observing the subtle shifts in courtly alliances. A stable hand might overhear a crucial exchange between two knights. A kitchen servant might notice who was dining with whom and what mood they seemed to be in. Information, even seemingly trivial bits, was meticulously collected and pieced together like a vast, complex jigsaw puzzle. The successful ruler wasn't just the one who could wield a sword, but the one who could effectively wield information, knowing what was truly happening behind the closed doors of their rivals, or even their own ostensibly loyal subjects. The jesters, those witty, often acerbic figures dancing on the periphery of power, also played a fascinating ambiguous role. Their privileged position as entertainers allowed them to say things no one else dared to mock the powerful, and to deliver uncomfortable truths wrapped in humor. But their wit also made them keen observers. They heard whispers, saw glances, and were often privy to conversations that others might not even register. Was the jester merely a fool or a shrewd intelligence gatherer? His jests a cover for his true purpose? Their ability to move freely between social strata from the royal chambers to the servants' quarters made them invaluable, though perhaps unwitting conduits of information. A seemingly absurd riddle might contain a vital coded message, a playful song, a warning. The line between common gossip and vital intelligence was incredibly fine, a tightrope walk over an abyss. What started as idle chatter about a courtier's new mistress could quickly escalate into rumors of political alliances, betrayals, and even assassination plots. Courtiers had to be exquisitely attuned to the undertones of every conversation, discerning what was merely chatter and what was a signal, a threat, or an opportunity. It was a constant game of poker, where everyone was trying to read everyone else's tells, and the stakes were often life and death. This pervasive culture of discretion and secrecy meant that personal loyalty was fiercely guarded, and betrayal was punished with terrifying swiftness. To be found revealing a secret, especially one that touched the monarch, was to invite ruin. The walls truly did have ears, and those ears often belonged to someone who reported directly to the highest authority. This fostered a climate of caution, where trust was a rare and precious commodity, and everyone watched their words, their gestures, and their associations with utmost care. It was a world where silence was often the loudest statement and discretion, the ultimate shield keeping the fragile machinery of power grinding forward, one quiet whisper at a time. For those like our male favorite, whose very existence was a quiet defiance of public norms, the art of discretion wasn't just a skill. It was the air they breathed, and the very thing that kept them, however precariously, alive. In such a world where words were weighted and glances were verbs, where an overheard whisper could dismantle a dynasty, how did people speak of the unspeakable? How did lovers communicate when their affections were forbidden? How did conspirators exchange information without a trail of parchment and ink? Sometimes the most potent messages were not spoken at all, but painted in the vibrant hues of nature, woven into the fabric of daily life, and whispered through the silent language of flowers. Yes, believe it or not. Before emojis and secret handshake memes, medieval folks had their own intricate system for saying a lot without saying much, and flowers were often at the heart of this botanical cryptography. Now you might think of flower meanings as a Victorian invention, a quaint parlor game for blushing debutantes. But the truth is, the language of flowers, or floriography, as the fancy folks call it, has roots stretching far deeper into history, particularly in cultures where direct expression of emotion, especially love or dissent, was frowned upon, or downright dangerous. In the Middle Ages, with its rigid social structures and watchful eyes, a well-placed bloom could convey volumes, a silent messenger, carrying secrets that no human courier dared to voice. It was a beautiful, often tragic form of communication, like writing a love letter in perfume that only the intended recipient could truly decipher. Take the humble rose, for instance. Today, we automatically associate it with love, and in many ways that association is ancient. But in medieval times, the rose's meaning was far more nuanced, a thorny thicket of symbolism. A red rose, yes, could speak of passionate love, a blazing confession hidden in plain sight. But a white rose often symbolized purity, silence, or innocence. Perhaps a perfect gift for someone you wish to convey discretion to, or even a subtle hint of innocence in a court rife with accusations. Then there was the yellow rose, which could, depending on the context, signify joy, but also jealousy or infidelity. Imagine sending a yellow rose to someone you suspected of betrayal, a quiet, devastating accusation that left no paper trail. It was a bit like a medieval text message, only prettier and without the autocorrect fails. Lilies, too, carried a heavy symbolic load. While often associated with purity and the Virgin Mary in Christian contexts, they also had a darker, more somber side. White lilies could symbolize death and resurrection, making them appropriate for funerals, but also perhaps as a morbid message to an enemy. Their pristine beauty could mask a chilling intent. This dual nature of many flowers made their language a high-wire act. Context was everything, and a misinterpretation could be embarrassing at best, disastrous at worst. This silent language was particularly vital for illicit or subtle messages, the kind that couldn't be trusted to a written note that might be intercepted or a spoken word that might be overheard. A knight might leave a specific flower on a lady's windowsill not just to declare his admiration, but to signal a secret meeting time. A courtier wanting to warn a friend of impending danger might send them a bouquet containing a flower known for its protective qualities, or one that subtly hinted at a trap. It was the original, plausible deniability. where you could claim innocent admiration if caught, while your true message had already been safely delivered. The knowledge of these meanings wasn't universal, of course. It was often a specialized skill cultivated within aristocratic circles among poets, or in the cloistered worlds of monasteries where scholars pored over ancient texts and allegories. Certain combinations of flowers, certain ways of presenting them, could create entire sentences without uttering a single sound. A flower given with the right hand versus the left, presented upside down, or with specific leaves removed. All these subtle variations added layers of meaning, creating a nuanced conversation only understood by the initiated. It was an exclusive club, its members bonded by their shared understanding of nature's quiet vocabulary. This practice wasn't just confined to European courts. In the vibrant, highly sophisticated Persian and Ottoman courts, the language of flowers, or selam, was an even more elaborate art form. Every flower, every color, every leaf had a precise numerical value or emotional significance. A lover could send an entire bouquet letter, conveying devotion, longing jealousy, or a plea for a rendezvous, all through the careful selection and arrangement of blossoms. A pomegranate flower might signify, "Come visit me," while a hyacinth could mean, "I am waiting." This was communication elevated to an art, a beautiful tapestry woven from petals and leaves, a silent conversation rich with passion and intrigue. The beauty of this system lay in its inherent discretion. A bouquet of flowers, however artfully arranged, was just a bouquet of flowers to the uninitiated. To the casual observer, it might simply be a pleasant gift, a gesture of politeness. But to the recipient armed with the secret key to floriography, it could be a passionate declaration, a dire warning, or a desperate plea. It was communication in plain sight, hidden by its very visibility. This made it particularly useful in environments like a royal court, where every interaction was scrutinized, and indiscretion could lead to ruin or worse, the same kind of tragic downfall that often awaited our male favorites. Consider the role of gardens in medieval life, not just as sources of food or beauty, but as living libraries of hidden meanings. A lord's garden might not just be a display of his wealth. It could be a carefully curated collection of symbolic plants, each hinting at alliances, personal beliefs, or even a hidden history known only to a select few. Walking through such a garden was like reading a silent poem, its verses written in green and gold, crimson and white. Ultimately, the language of flowers highlights a fascinating aspect of medieval life, the human need for expression, even when direct channels were closed. It speaks to the ingenuity of people forced to navigate a world of strict rules and profound dangers. These silent messengers, plucked from the earth and imbued with secret meaning, offered a fleeting moment of connection, a clandestine conversation in a world that demanded conformity. They were a testament to the enduring power of symbolism, a beautiful workaround for the suffocating silence of absolute power. And perhaps for some of our hidden figures, a small, fragrant bloom was the only true voice they ever had. A quiet whisper of their hopes and fears sent across a crowded room, understood only by the one person who mattered most. Sometimes, however, even the most artful use of floriography wasn't enough, or a different kind of silent yet powerful presence was required within the inner circles of power. Beyond the whispers of male favorites, another group of individuals often moved through the gilded halls of medieval courts, their lives marked by a profound and irreversible sacrifice, yet often wielding immense, if often unseen, influence, the eunuchs. Now, before your mind jumps to dramatic opera scenes or exoticized tales, let's understand that the role of the eunuch was far more complex and pervasive than popular culture often suggests, and their historical reality was often a stark contrast to the romanticized or demonized portrayals. While distinct from male concubines, their paths often intersected, sharing a similar proximity to power and a unique, often precarious social standing. The practice of creating eunuchs individuals castrated to serve in various capacities stretches back into antiquity long before the Middle Ages and was prevalent across a vast geographical and cultural expanse. From the imperial courts of China to the Byzantine Empire, and most notably in the Ottoman Empire, eunuchs played crucial roles that ranged from guardians of harems to powerful administrators' advisors and even military commanders. Their very existence was a testament to the lengths to which power structures would go to ensure loyalty control and a specific kind of service. The primary and most brutal reason for their creation was to ensure their absolute loyalty and to remove any perceived threat to the dynastic line. By denying them the ability to father children, they were theoretically rendered incapable of establishing their own rival lineages or challenging the existing power structure through procreation. They were in essence neutered of dynastic ambition, becoming extensions of the ruler's will, their entire existence bound to the court. It was a rather extreme form of employee loyalty program, if you think about it, with a very permanent sign-up bonus. The process itself was, of course, horrifying. Castration, particularly in an age before modern medicine, was incredibly dangerous, often leading to infection, hemorrhage, and death. Those who survived faced a lifetime of physical changes, including altered bone structure, vocal changes, and a distinct lack of secondary sexual characteristics. It was a profound and irreversible transformation, a sacrifice of their very essence, often performed on young boys, sometimes even infants, who had no say in their own destiny. This was not a choice. It was a fate imposed upon them often by impoverished families selling their sons or by conquerors seeking compliant servants. Yet despite this brutal beginning, many eunuchs rose to positions of extraordinary power and influence. In the Chinese imperial court, for example, eunuchs could become incredibly wealthy and powerful, controlling vast bureaucracies, commanding armies, and acting as the emperor's most trusted confidants. They were often the only men allowed into the inner sanctum of the imperial palace, privy to the emperor's most private moments and deepest secrets. Their lack of family ties, which was initially a disadvantage, often became their greatest strength, as it meant their loyalty was theoretically undivided, directed solely towards the emperor. They became a parallel power structure, sometimes even rivaling the traditional aristocracy. It was a fascinating paradox. Individuals who had lost so much, gaining so much in return, a bit like a chess piece that can only move one way, but that one way happens to be directly to the queen. Similarly, in the Byzantine Empire, eunuchs held key administrative and military positions, often serving as chamberlains, treasury officials, and even generals. Their meticulous education and training, combined with their unique access to the imperial family, made them indispensable. They were often highly literate, skilled in diplomacy, and deeply knowledgeable about courtly intrigue. They were the silent engines of empire, ensuring the smooth functioning of bureaucracy and the execution of imperial will. But perhaps nowhere were eunuchs more famously and visibly integrated into the fabric of court life than in the Ottoman Empire. Here they were the guardians of the imperial harem, a vast and complex world of women concubines and royal children. The chief black eunuch in particular was one of the most powerful figures in the entire empire, controlling access to the sultan's private quarters, managing the immense wealth of the harem, and acting as a crucial intermediary between the women of the imperial household and the outside world. They were the gatekeepers of intimacy, the silent witnesses to power, their lives intertwined with the very heart of the empire. Their unique social status was a fascinating study in paradox. They were neither fully male nor fully female, in the traditional sense existing in a liminal space. This often placed them outside traditional family structures without the pressures of marriage or the responsibilities of lineage. This detachment, while born of a cruel act, could also grant them a certain freedom, allowing them to dedicate themselves entirely to their service. They formed their own networks, their own hierarchies, and developed a distinct culture within the courts. They were the ultimate insiders, yet perpetually outsiders to the conventional societal norms. Despite their power, however, their position remained inherently vulnerable. Their status was entirely dependent on the ruler's favor. A change in leadership, a shift in political winds, or even a simple accusation could lead to their downfall, sometimes as swift and brutal as that of a male favorite. Their lack of a traditional family base meant they had no powerful kin to protect them, no inherited lands to retreat to. They were in a very real sense rootless, their entire existence tied to the fortunes of the court. The stories of eunuchs, unlike those of male concubines, are often more readily available in historical records precisely because their roles were often institutionalized and officially recognized. Yet even their narratives are filtered through the biases of the time, often portraying them as cunning manipulative, or simply as exotic curiosities. The human element, the personal tragedy of their forced transformation, the psychological impact of their unique lives often remains unexamined. We see their power, but rarely their pain. They were the ultimate silent witnesses, privy to the most intimate secrets of rulers, the most delicate negotiations, and the most brutal realities of power. They saw everything, heard everything, and were expected to say nothing except what was absolutely necessary for their service. Their lives were a testament to human resilience in the face of profound adversity, and a stark reminder of the lengths to which societies would go to maintain control and order even at the cost of individual humanity. They were the quiet gears in the vast grinding machine of empire, their sacrifices fueling the ambitions of others, their unique status, a chilling reflection of the absolute power they served. And in their silent watch, they often became the true keepers of courtly secrets, their eyes and ears far more reliable than any written decree or whispered promise. And while eunuchs and favorites served as human conduits of information, the very structures they inhabited were often designed with a similar purpose to control the flow of knowledge, to facilitate discreet communication, and perhaps most chillingly, to enable surveillance. Medieval castles and palaces, those towering behemoths of stone and timber, were not just symbols of power or defensive strongholds. They were also intricate acoustic instruments, silent observers, and the ultimate architectural tools for both impressing visitors and keeping a very close eye or ear on everyone within their walls. Think of a grand medieval hall. Its vastness and high ceilings were designed to awe, to make the individual feel small in the presence of immense power. But those echoing spaces also had a peculiar acoustic quality. A whisper in one corner could carry surprisingly far-reaching ears that were meant to be far out of range. Conversely, a public declaration might get lost in the cavernous space its true intent diluted. Designing for sound, whether intentionally or accidentally, was an essential if often unacknowledged part of medieval architecture. It was a bit like building a giant stone echo chamber where secrets could and did bounce off the walls. But beyond mere acoustic happenstance, many medieval castles and palaces featured deliberate architectural elements designed to aid in surveillance and clandestine communication. Secret passages were not just the stuff of Gothic novels. They were a very real and very practical feature of many important buildings. These hidden routes, often concealed behind tapestries within false walls or beneath cleverly disguised floorboards, allowed the powerful to move unseen and unheard. Imagine a king or queen slipping through a hidden door not to escape danger, but to reach a secluded vantage point or to meet a trusted confidant without attracting attention. These passages were the ultimate bypass lanes in the courtly traffic, ensuring nobody saw you coming or going. Even more intriguing were the listening posts, or eavesdropping galleries, that cunning medieval architects sometimes incorporated. These weren't grand, obvious balconies, but rather discreet niches, small, often unadorned rooms, or concealed alcoves built into the thick walls of a great hall or a lord's private chambers. From these hidden vantage points, a person could clearly hear conversations happening below or in an adjacent room without being seen. The sound would travel through cleverly constructed conduits, narrow shafts, or even through the very stone amplified by the confined space of the listening post. It was the medieval equivalent of having hidden microphones everywhere, turning unsuspecting conversations into private intelligence briefings. Consider the meticulous planning involved in such features. These weren't afterthoughts. They were integral to the design, suggesting a profound understanding of acoustics and human behavior. They spoke to a pervasive sense of paranoia, a constant need for rulers to know what was truly being said and plotted within their own walls. After all, a castle might protect you from external enemies, but it was often the internal ones, those whispering in your very halls, who posed the greater threat. The practicalities of sound travel in stone structures, often cold and resonant, meant that even without specific listening posts, discreet conversations were a challenge. Footfalls echoed voices carried, and the rustle of garments could betray presence. This environment forced courtiers and conspirators to develop their own methods of ensuring privacy. Conversations would move to secluded gardens at night, or to the farthest reaches of a sprawling estate, far from prying ears. Whispers would be exchanged in the clangor of the forge, or amidst the commotion of a busy stable, hoping the ambient noise would mask their words. It was a constant battle against the inherent acoustics of their stone surroundings, a game of hide-and-seek played with sound itself. While specific detailed blueprints of such spy architecture are rare, for obvious reasons, as you wouldn't want to publish a map of your secret passages, historians and archaeologists have discovered evidence of these features in various historical buildings across Europe. From the winding secret staircases within the walls of Stirling Castle in Scotland, believed to allow discreet movement for both residents and potential spies, to the alleged listening holes found in the Great Hall of Kenilworth Castle, allowing Lord Leicester to overhear conversations, the physical evidence supports the notion that surveillance was built into the very fabric of medieval power. These weren't just theoretical constructs. They were tangible expressions of a ruler's need for control and security. The very scale of these buildings contributed to the sense of surveillance. A multi-storied castle, with its numerous towers, battlements, and windows, presented countless vantage points from which to observe the movements of people in the courtyards below or in the surrounding lands. Guards stationed in high turrets weren't just looking for external invaders. They were also keeping an eye on the internal traffic, ensuring no unauthorized departures or clandestine meetings took place within the castle grounds. It was a constant unspoken reminder that someone somewhere was always watching. Even seemingly innocuous features like elaborate fireplaces with large chimneys could sometimes be repurposed for acoustic advantage, their vast flues acting as unintended sound channels. The sounds of a crackling fire and general hubbub might obscure voices within the room, but a quiet voice might carry surprisingly well up the chimney and out to a waiting ear on the roof or in an adjacent flue. It was like an accidental telephone system connecting the most unlikely of places. The pervasive fear of espionage and betrayal shaped the very way people interacted within these grand structures. Trust was a precious and rare commodity, and suspicion was a constant companion. Every conversation held the potential for being overheard, every action for being observed. This created a climate of profound caution where individuals learned to guard their words, their expressions, and their movements with meticulous care. It was a world where privacy, as we understand it today, was practically non-existent for anyone operating within the sphere of power. For those like our male favorites, or even the powerful eunuchs who occupied such sensitive positions, this architectural surveillance was an ever-present reality. Their lives were lived under a constant microscope, their very whispers potentially echoing through hidden conduits to an unseen listener. The gilded cages they inhabited were not just metaphorical. They were literal, built of stone and cunning design, ensuring that even in their most private moments, they were never truly alone, never truly unobserved. The stones themselves were listening mute witnesses to the intricate dance of power, ambition, and secret desires that unfolded within their ancient silent walls. And in a world where secrets could kill, the castle itself was often the most vigilant and unforgiving of spies. And within those watchful walls, amidst the whispers and the hidden passages, the most overt and yet often most private transactions were taking place, the dynastic marriages. Forget for a moment the fairy tales of princes and princesses falling in love. In the Middle Ages, particularly for royalty and high nobility, marriage was rarely about a beating heart and shared glances across a crowded ballroom. It was a cold, hard negotiation, a political chess game played with human pawns designed to secure power, forge alliances, and most critically, to ensure the continuation of the family line. The weight of these expectations was immense, a heavy crown placed upon the head of even the most innocent child. Imagine a young prince or princess barely out of childhood suddenly faced with the news that their future was decided. Their spouse-to-be was not chosen for charm, wit, or kindness, but for their strategic location on a map the size of their family's armies or the vastness of their dowry. It was a brutal education in realpolitik, teaching them early on that their personal desires were utterly insignificant compared to the needs of the realm. Their wedding day was less a celebration of love and more a signing of a treaty with their bodies as the ultimate collateral. The motivations behind these royal marriage markets were purely practical. First and foremost was the political alliance. A marriage could instantly transform bitter rivals into staunch allies, combining military strength and diplomatic influence. Two kingdoms, once eyeing each other across a hostile border, could suddenly find themselves united by a shared bloodline, their armies now fighting side by side. It was a remarkably efficient way to redraw the geopolitical map without spilling a single drop of blood, at least not initially. Think of it as the ultimate merger and acquisition, but with crowns and castles instead of corporations. Then there was the economic incentive. Dowries were colossal, often comprising vast tracts of land chests overflowing with gold and jewels, or control over lucrative trade routes. A powerful dowry could significantly bolster a kingdom's treasury or provide a much-needed injection of wealth. Conversely, a king might marry off a daughter to a lesser noble using the dowry received to fund a war or shore up his own power base. It was a complex system of financial transactions where human beings were quite literally valued in terms of their material worth. No wonder so many royal accounts felt a bit like reading a balance sheet. But perhaps the most profound pressure, the one that truly defined these unions, was the dynastic imperative, the desperate, relentless need to produce an heir. In an age of high infant mortality and frequent warfare, ensuring a clear line of succession was paramount. A kingdom without a recognized heir was a kingdom ripe for civil war, invasion, and chaos. The moment a royal marriage was solemnized, the unspoken clock began ticking a silent countdown to the moment a healthy, legitimate male child was born. For the poor princess, her value often hinged entirely on her fertility. If she produced a son, she was a success. If she produced only daughters or worse, remained barren, her position could become precarious, even leading to annulment or being set aside. It was a biological lottery with the highest possible stakes. The negotiations for these unions were painstaking, often taking years and involving armies of diplomats, lawyers, and even astrologers. Every clause of the marriage contract was scrutinized: the size of the dowry, the rights of the children, the succession laws, and even the religious conversion of one party if the kingdoms had different faiths. These weren't hastily scribbled agreements. They were intricate legal documents, thicker than many a medieval Bible designed to cover every conceivable eventuality, right down to who got to keep the silver platters if things went south. Imagine the emotional toll on the individuals caught in this web. They were not consulted for their affections, only for their compliance. Their childhoods might have been spent in separate courts, never meeting their future spouse until days before the wedding. Sometimes they were sent off to live in their betrothed's court, years in advance, essentially as hostages, to ensure the alliance held firm. This was not the stuff of storybook romance. It was a testament to endurance duty and often quiet resignation. For the males, the pressure to produce an heir was immense. Their masculinity and their ability to secure the dynasty were inextricably linked. Failure to do so could lead to a king being pressured to seek an annulment, to take a mistress in hopes of siring an illegitimate but acknowledged son, or even facing a succession crisis. The weight of an entire kingdom's future rested squarely on their ability to procreate. It was a performance with no understudy, and the critics were an entire nation. For the females, the burden was arguably even greater. Their bodies became the vessel for the future of two kingdoms. Every pregnancy was fraught with anxiety. Every birth, a public event scrutinized by an entire court. If a healthy boy was born, relief would ripple through the kingdom. If it was a girl, or worse, a stillbirth, the pressure would mount again. Many queens endured multiple pregnancies, often at great risk to their own health, all for the sake of the dynasty. Their worth was measured not in their intelligence or their character, but in their capacity for childbirth. The political realities also meant that royal children were often treated more as pawns than people. They could be sent abroad at a young age to be raised in the court of their future spouse, a cold form of cultural assimilation designed to ensure loyalty to their new homeland. They might be married multiple times throughout their lives, their alliances shifting with the political winds, each marriage a new set of duties, a new bed to share with a stranger, a new set of expectations. Their personal identities were often subsumed by their dynastic roles, making them feel like living, breathing extensions of their family's coat of arms. This intricate dance of power and procreation meant that while male concubines existed in the shadows, these royal spouses lived under an entirely different kind of scrutiny. A very public spotlight that illuminated every aspect of their personal lives. Their relationships, or lack thereof, were matters of state. Their pregnancies were celebrated or mourned by an entire populace. Their very existence was a public performance dictated by the relentless demands of the crown and the crushing weight of dynastic expectation. They were the most valuable assets in the grand game of thrones, and their personal happiness was more often than not a luxury they could ill afford. Their story is less about individual heartbreak and more about the systematic sacrifice of personal will for the sake of enduring power. A cold, hard truth that echoes through the ancient stone walls where these calculated unions were born. Those ancient stone walls, silent witnesses to countless calculated unions and crushing expectations, also held myriad secrets about the private lives of the very royals who inhabited them. For all the public pomp and ceremony, for all the dynastic marriages designed to cement alliances, the human heart. Being the unruly thing, it has rarely confined itself neatly to official decrees. Behind the impenetrable facades of duty and decorum, monarchs and their consorts, much like the rest of humanity, harbored desires engaged in escapades, and sometimes, quite spectacularly, stumbled into scandals that rippled through their courts and beyond. Imagine, if you will, the challenge of maintaining privacy when your every move from the moment you woke to the time you retired was observed, scrutinized, and often recorded. Kings and queens were public property. Their lives lived in an almost perpetual state of performance. From the ceremonial dressing and dining to the formal audiences and public prayers, there was little room for genuine solitude. Even their bedchambers, while ostensibly private, were often attended by numerous servants ready to assist, or perhaps to overhear. It was like living in the ultimate reality show, long before cameras were even a twinkle in an inventor's eye, with the entire kingdom as your avid gossiping audience. Yet despite this omnipresent scrutiny, human nature found a way. Just as water finds cracks in stone, desire found loopholes in decorum. Love affairs, both passionate and fleeting, were almost as common in medieval courts as feasting. Sometimes these were fleeting dalliances with a courtier or a lady-in-waiting conducted in hushed tones, down secret passages, or through the subtle language of flowers we've already discussed. Other times, they blossomed into enduring relationships, deep connections formed, despite the immense social and political obstacles. These were the true other lives of royals lived in parallel to their official duty-bound existences. Take, for instance, the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman who lived a life so rich with intrigue it could fill a dozen novels. Her marriage to Louis VII of France was notoriously tempestuous, often due to her independent spirit and his pious rigidity. She eventually secured an annulment practically unheard of for a queen, only to immediately marry Henry Plantagenet, who would become Henry II of England. This second marriage produced a slew of famous children, including Richard the Lionheart and King John. But even with a quiver full of legitimate heirs, whispers of her various liaisons, her supposed loose morals, for the time constantly followed her. Whether true or exaggerated, these tales highlight the fascination with royal private lives and the delicious scandals they could generate. Or consider King Edward II of England, whose relationship with Piers Gaveston became one of the most infamous royal scandals of the medieval period. Their bond, which many historians believe was deeply intimate, enraged the English barons who saw Gaveston as an arrogant upstart exerting undue influence over the king. The public display of royal favor, the lavish gifts, and Gaveston's perceived insolence directly challenged the traditional power structures and ultimately led to Gaveston's brutal execution. This was more than just a personal affair. It was a political earthquake, demonstrating how a ruler's private affections could ignite a public firestorm. It was a king putting his heart, or at least his affections, squarely on his sleeve, much to the horror of his very traditional court. And then there were the countless, often unrecorded affairs that never quite exploded into full-blown scandal. A king might maintain a mistress, sometimes discreetly, sometimes more openly, and often with the grudging acceptance of a queen who understood the unspoken rules of dynastic duty. These women, sometimes from noble families, sometimes from humbler origins, might gain influence, wealth, and even produce illegitimate children, who, while not in the direct line of succession, could still play roles in courtly life. These were the unofficial annexes of the royal family, a bit like a satellite office for personal preferences. The double standards were, of course, glaringly obvious. A king's indiscretions might be tolerated or even seen as a sign of his virility. A queen's, however, could be catastrophic, risking accusations of treason, the legitimacy of heirs, and the very stability of the realm. A queen suspected of infidelity could face imprisonment, banishment, or even execution. Her personal desires deemed a threat to the entire kingdom. It was a gendered tightrope walk, where one slip for a queen meant a plunge into oblivion. Even beyond sexual relationships, the private lives of royals involved unusual habits, quirks, and sometimes profound eccentricities. Some monarchs were devout to the point of asceticism, others were gluttons for pleasure. Some enjoyed quiet scholarly pursuits, while others were obsessed with hunting or warfare. These personal preferences, while seemingly minor, could subtly influence policy appointments and the overall atmosphere of the court. A king who preferred quiet reflection might foster a court of scholars. One who loved lavish tournaments might attract knights and poets of heroic verse. The sheer loneliness of their position also contributed to the peculiar nature of their private lives. Surrounded by flatterers and schemers, true friendship was a rare gem. They might turn to their most trusted advisors, their childhood companions, or even in rare moments of unguarded vulnerability, to their male or female favorites, seeking a genuine connection in a world defined by transactional relationships. These were the fleeting glimpses of the human being beneath the crown, struggling with the same fears, hopes, and loneliness as anyone else, but magnified by the immense weight of their station. Ultimately, the private lives of medieval royals and the scandals they occasionally birthed provide a fascinating counterpoint to the official narrative of duty and decorum. They remind us that even amidst the most rigid social structures, human emotion, desire, and sometimes sheer recklessness always found a way to assert themselves. These were individuals thrust into roles of immense power, yet grappling with deeply personal struggles, their very humanity often at odds with the demands of their crowns. And it is in these hidden moments, these whispered affairs and hushed controversies, that we find the most compelling evidence of their humanity, reminding us that even behind the impenetrable stone walls and the most glittering facades, hearts still beat, and secrets, no matter how desperately guarded, sometimes found a way to escape and dance in the flickering candlelight of history. But while some hearts sought illicit comfort in the shadows of the court, others embraced a far darker form of intimacy. One measured not in whispers and stolen glances, but in the slow, agonizing descent into illness and ultimately oblivion. For in the cutthroat world of medieval power, where loyalty was fleeting and ambition a sharp-edged sword poison, emerged as the silent, insidious weapon of choice, turning innocent cups of wine and seemingly innocuous meals into instruments of cold, calculated murder. The fear of the serpent in the garden, the unseen killer lurking in the shadows, was a constant chilling presence in the medieval court, adding another layer of paranoia to an already watchful existence. Imagine the atmosphere at a grand royal feast. The tables groan under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and flowing wine. Minstrels play jesters, tumble, and laughter fills the hall. Yet for many, beneath the veneer of revelry, a quiet dread might fester. Who prepared the food? Whose hands touched the goblet? Was that a strange taste on the tongue, a sudden chill in the stomach? In an age without forensic science, without clear understanding of disease, any sudden illness, any unexpected death, particularly among the powerful, immediately raised the specter of poison. It was the ultimate medieval whodunit, with no detectives, just suspicion and lingering fear. Poison was particularly favored because of its subtle nature. Unlike a public assassination by sword or dagger, which risked immediate reprisal, and open warfare, poison allowed for a gradual, less traceable demise. A powerful rival could simply fall ill, waste away, and eventually die, their death attributed to natural causes, a sudden fever, or a mysterious ailment. The true killer could remain hidden, their hands clean, their motives unproven. It was the preferred method for eliminating inconvenient spouses, troublesome heirs, or ambitious courtiers without drawing overt suspicion. A little drop here, a sprinkle there, and suddenly your problem had simply vanished. The poisons themselves were crude by modern standards, but terrifyingly effective. Arsenic, often derived from minerals, was a popular choice. Colorless, odorless, and tasteless when dissolved, it could be slipped into food or drink with chilling ease. Its effects mimicked common illnesses: stomach pains, vomiting, diarrhea, followed by weakness and eventually organ failure. A doctor, if one was even available, might attribute the symptoms to a bad humor, a sudden chill, or a simple malady. The killer would walk away, leaving only a lingering question mark in the minds of the suspicious. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was another common choice, particularly for its ability to induce madness or hallucinations before death. Imagine a powerful lord suddenly descending into fits of raving paranoia, speaking gibberish, and dying in a state of terror. Such an end could be easily attributed to demonic possession or a sudden loss of reason rather than the calculated act of a rival. Other plant-based poisons like hemlock or digitalis were also known, their effects ranging from paralysis to heart failure, each offering a distinct way to subtly dispatch an enemy. The medieval apothecary, ostensibly a healer, could also, with a wink and a nod, become an unwitting or sometimes quite willing purveyor of death. The paranoia surrounding poisoning was pervasive. Rulers often employed food tasters, humble individuals whose unenviable job it was to sample every dish and drink before their lord. Their survival was the king's guarantee. Gifts of food or drink from rivals were treated with the utmost suspicion, sometimes refused outright. Banquets might feature only dishes prepared under the direct supervision of the royal kitchen, sealed and guarded until served. It was a culinary minefield where every bite could be your last. Famous, or at least heavily rumored, cases of royal poisoning pepper medieval history. The sudden death of powerful figures like the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VII, or the mysterious demise of Pope John VIII, were often attributed to poison, even if definitive proof was lacking. The very suspicion of poison, even without evidence, was enough to destabilize courts, ignite feuds, and cast a long, dark shadow over a ruler's reign. It created a climate of distrust where nobody truly felt safe, where even your closest confidant could be a secret agent of your demise. Consider the political implications. If a king could be poisoned, then his rule was inherently fragile. If an heir could be eliminated, then the line of succession was never truly secure. Poison was a weapon that undermined the very foundations of power, turning the grand public stage of the court into a clandestine battlefield. It empowered the weak against the strong, the cunning against the overtly powerful. A mere serving maid armed with a tiny vial could bring down a king, a chilling thought that must have kept many a monarch awake at night. The fear also extended to the long-term effects of poison. Some historical accounts speak of slow poisons, concoctions designed to induce a gradual decline, mimicking natural illness over months or even years. This allowed the perpetrator to escape immediate detection and to witness the slow, agonizing demise of their victim. It was a prolonged torture, a chilling testament to the cruelty and patience of those who wielded such dark arts. This pervasive use, or at least the pervasive fear of poison, highlights a grim truth about power in the Middle Ages. It was a zero-sum game, where one person's rise often necessitated another's fall, and where the most direct path to ascension was often the elimination of rivals. Morality in such a context often took a back seat to survival and ambition. The elegant silks and shining armor of the court often concealed a brutal struggle for dominance, a subtle war fought with unseen weapons. For figures like our male concubines who existed in a precarious position of favor without formal power, the fear of poison would have been particularly acute. Their closeness to the patron made them targets for those who sought to undermine their influence. A rival might attempt to poison the favorite to remove their access to the ruler, or even to poison the ruler and frame the favorite using their proximity as damning evidence. Their very existence in the inner circle made them vulnerable, turning every meal, every shared drink, into a potential gamble with their lives. They might have been showered with jewels and silks, but their life was a tightrope walk over a pit of unseen vipers. Ultimately, the chilling prevalence of poisoning in the medieval court underscores the brutal realities beneath the glittering surface. It reminds us that even in an age of chivalry and religious fervor, human ambition could descend to the darkest depths, turning the intimate act of sharing a meal into a deadly gamble. The silent, creeping terror of the unknown assailant, the fear of the tainted cup, added an invisible yet profoundly impactful layer of darkness to the grand theatrical performance that was medieval courtly life. The most dangerous weapon, it turned out, wasn't always a sword or a siege engine. Sometimes it was just a tiny, undetectable drop in a goblet, delivering a silent, tragic end. The very idea of a silent, tragic end, brought by a hidden drop of poison, casts a long, unsettling shadow. But while some secret ingredients brought a chilling end to life, others promised warmth, desire, and a hint of magic. For in the perpetually watchful medieval court, where duty often outweighed desire and arranged marriages were the norm. The human heart. Being the unruly thing, it is still sought avenues for passion, pleasure, and sometimes a little extra nudge in the right direction. This brings us to a fascinating, often overlooked aspect of medieval life, the secret world of perfumes and aphrodisiacs, the fragrant whispers and potent concoctions that aimed to stir the senses and ignite the flames of attraction. Let's be honest, the medieval world, while rich in history and grand castles, wasn't exactly a festival of fresh linen and spring blossoms. Personal hygiene, while not entirely absent, certainly wasn't the daily ritual we know today. So masking less than pleasant odors was a practical necessity, a fragrant armor against the daily realities of life. But beyond simply covering up the occasional whiff of unwashed humanity scent, held a deeper, more symbolic significance. Perfumes were not just about smelling pretty. They were about broadcasting your status, warding off perceived miasmas of disease, or even subtly alluring someone without a single spoken word. The creation of medieval perfumes was an art form, a blend of herbal knowledge, rudimentary chemistry, and perhaps a touch of wishful thinking. Common ingredients often included familiar herbs like rosemary, lavender, and mint, prized not just for their aroma, but for their perceived medicinal and cleansing properties. Spices, those exotic treasures transported along ancient trade routes, played a crucial role. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and frankincense lent deep, rich, and often spicy notes, reflecting the wearer's wealth and access to rare commodities. Resins like frankincense and myrrh, with their earthy spiritual undertones, were also popular. But here's where it gets a little wilder. Animal products were often the secret ingredient that gave medieval perfumes their depth and staying power. Musk derived from the musk deer and civet from the civet cat were highly prized for their pungent animalistic notes. These were not for the faint of nose, mind you. They were powerful, intoxicating, and often quite expensive. Imagine a medieval noble draped in silks, emanating a scent that was a heady mix of rose spice and the primal scent of a civet. It was a true olfactory statement, broadcasting power allure and perhaps just a hint of danger. These concoctions were often made by infusing herbs and spices in oils, or alcohol, creating tinctures and essences that were then blended into complex, personalized fragrances. Distillation in its early forms also played a role, though it was a laborious process. These weren't just about smelling good. They were about influence. A king might present a bespoke perfume to a favored courtier, a sign of immense regard. A lady might wear a specific scent to a banquet, hoping to catch the attention of a particular suitor. The right perfume could be a silent introduction, a subtle flirtation, or even a statement of intent. It was like carrying a secret weapon in a tiny vial, one that attacked the senses and bypassed rational thought. And then we venture into the truly intriguing and often risque realm of aphrodisiacs. In a world where procreation was a duty and love was a fortunate, though not always necessary, byproduct of marriage, people desperately sought ways to ignite passion or ensure fertility. The belief that certain foods, herbs, or concoctions could stir desire or enhance virility was widespread and deeply held. It wasn't just folklore. It was part of their understanding of the natural world and the intricate workings of the human body. Because sometimes even royalty needed a little help setting the mood. The list of supposed aphrodisiacs was long and varied. Rich, nourishing foods were often considered potent, hearty meats, eggs, and yes, even oysters. Those briny mollusks were believed to stimulate the senses and bolster strength. Strong warming spices like ginger, nutmeg, and cloves were also thought to heat the blood and quicken the pulse, making them popular additions to dishes intended to inspire romance. Wine in moderation was believed to loosen inhibitions and enhance conviviality, a truth that, to be fair, still holds up quite well today. Herbs and plants, however, offered the most mystique. Mandrake root, with its human-like shape and legendary properties, was one of the most famous, believed to be incredibly potent, though also highly toxic. Its use was steeped in superstition and danger, a clear example of the blurred lines between medicine magic and outright quackery. Other less dangerous herbs were also used, their specific properties often passed down through generations of folk wisdom. These weren't just eaten. They were sometimes brewed into teas, ground into powders to be sprinkled on food, or even distilled into potent elixirs. The intent behind these concoctions was clear: to transform a dutiful spouse into a passionate lover, to encourage conception in a barren union, or simply to enhance the pleasure of an illicit rendezvous. It was a way for individuals to exert a degree of control over their own desires and the desires of others, to bend nature to their will. The risks, however, were considerable. Many supposed aphrodisiacs were ineffective. Some were outright dangerous, and a miscalculation could lead to severe illness or even death, turning a quest for passion into a tragic misadventure. The line between a love potion and a slow poison could be terrifyingly thin. This is where the figure of the medieval apothecary becomes so fascinating. More than just a dispenser of medicine, the apothecary was a blend of chemist-herbalist and perhaps a touch of charming rogue. They were the alchemists of desire and despair, capable of crafting a soothing balm, a deadly draught, or a fragrant perfume, often for the same set of hands. They were privy to the most intimate needs and secrets of their clients, from curing ailments to concocting love potions. A discreet visit to the apothecary could solve a multitude of problems or create entirely new ones. They knew which herbs could calm, which could kill, and which could theoretically set a heart ablaze. In the royal court, these secret ingredients were tools of profound personal agency. A queen might use a specific perfume to draw her often absent king back to her bed. A courtier secretly smitten with a lord or lady might subtly introduce an aphrodisiac into a shared meal, hoping to ignite a reciprocal flame. These were personal battles, fought with unseen weapons, a counterbalance to the rigid public expectations that governed royal lives. While their duties were public, their desires could remain profoundly private, nurtured by secret scents and potent potions. Ultimately, the medieval obsession with perfumes and aphrodisiacs reveals a deeply human longing for control over emotions, connections, and destinies, even in a world where so much was dictated by fate and power. These secret ingredients, whether carried on the skin or ingested in a meal, offered a hidden realm of personal expression and pleasure, a whispered defiance against the loud dictates of duty. They remind us that even behind the impenetrable stone walls and the most glittering facades, there were individuals seeking to add a little spice, a little passion, and a whole lot of scent to their lives, sometimes with charming results, and sometimes with a touch of unintended disaster. They were the silent promises of passion in a world often starved for true affection. And just as art remembered in silent images, so too did music. Remember in resonant echoes, carrying the stories of medieval life love, and sometimes even secrets on its very breath. Far from the polished formal concerts of today, medieval music was woven into the very fabric of daily existence in a court, a constant backdrop to feast ceremonies and private moments. It was the original soundtrack to history, providing both entertainment and often a subtle commentary that spoke directly to the heart long after the last notes had faded into the stone walls. Imagine a grand hall warmed by the crackling fire, filled with the aroma of roasting meats and the chatter of courtiers. Then a lute begins to pluck a pipe warbles, and a voice perhaps clear and strong, perhaps soft and melancholic, begins to sing. This was the omnipresent pulse of medieval courtly life. Music wasn't just a leisure activity, it was a fundamental part of ceremony diplomacy and personal expression. From the most solemn church chants to the most boisterous drinking songs, sound filled the air, reflecting and shaping the moods of the moment. The types of music and their performers were as diverse as the medieval landscape itself. At the upper echelons, you had the troubadours and trouvères in Western Europe, noble poets and musicians who often composed and performed intricate songs of courtly love. These weren't just simple ditties. They were sophisticated lyrical and melodic structures, often filled with complex metaphors and double meanings. They sang of impossible loves, of chivalrous knights, and unattainable ladies' themes that resonated deeply with the romantic ideals and perhaps the secret longings of their aristocratic audiences. These troubadours traveled from court to court, carrying not just their music, but also news gossip and a subtle cultural influence, like living, breathing Spotify playlists of their era. Then there were the minstrels, the professional entertainers who roamed the land. Less aristocratic than the troubadours, minstrels were the ultimate medieval variety show performers. They could sing ballads of heroic deeds, tell humorous stories, perform acrobatics, and most importantly, play a variety of instruments. They brought news and entertainment from distant lands, often incorporating local events and personalities into their songs, sometimes with witty, sometimes with biting commentary. They were the stand-up comedians, news reporters, and pop stars, all rolled into one, their livelihood, depending on their ability to capture and hold an audience. A good minstrel could turn a dull feast into a lively spectacle, and their songs, often catchy and memorable, could spread ideas and even subtly influence public opinion. Of course, sacred music also held a paramount place, particularly in monastic settings and royal chapels. Gregorian chants, motets, and polyphonic compositions filled cathedrals and private chapels, uplifting the spirit and providing a soundtrack to religious devotion. Even in secular courts, pious rulers would commission and appreciate sacred music, often believing it brought divine favor. This music, with its intricate harmonies and soaring melodies, was a stark contrast to the earthly tunes of the troubadours, reminding everyone of the spiritual realm that supposedly governed all. The instruments themselves were varied and often quite beautiful. The lute with its pear-shaped body was perhaps the most iconic, its gentle plucking, a common accompaniment to singers. Harps, from small portable ones to larger floor-standing instruments, provided melodic lines. Fidel's early violins and rebecques offered more strident sounds, while pipes, flutes, and early forms of trumpets added wind and brass. Percussion, often simple drums and tambourines, provided rhythm for dancing and celebration. Each instrument had its own character, contributing to the rich tapestry of medieval soundscapes. Imagine the delicate sound of a lute accompanying a hushed love song in a private chamber, a clandestine serenade heard only by a privileged few. The role of music extended beyond mere entertainment. It was a powerful tool for political messaging and social cohesion. Epic ballads recounted the glorious deeds of ancestors, reinforcing dynastic legitimacy and national pride. Satirical songs, often performed by jesters or clever minstrels, could discreetly mock rivals or criticize unpopular policies, delivering dissent cloaked in humor. A well-crafted song could spread propaganda rally troops or even subtly undermine an enemy's reputation. It was propaganda before the printing press carried on the wings of melody. Moreover, music played a vital role in storytelling. Many medieval songs were narrative recounting legends, historical events, or popular romances. These were the encyclopedias and novels of the illiterate masses, their stories passed down through generations, not by books, but by heartfelt performances. Through song tales of brave knights, tragic lovers, and cunning villains endured, shaping the collective imagination and preserving a vibrant oral tradition. For our hidden figures, like the male favorite or the powerful eunuch, music could have held particular significance. A minstrel's ballad of an impossible love might resonate deeply with their own unspoken desires. A private performance by a skilled lutenist could offer moments of profound emotional connection, a rare respite from the constant scrutiny and pretense of courtly life. Perhaps a love song performed at their patron's request contained a special coded meaning, known only to them, a secret whispered in the language of melody. Music also provided a legitimate social space for interaction, a common ground where people of different statuses could momentarily forget their hierarchies and simply enjoy the shared experience. The communal singing of carols during festivals, the lively dances at a wedding, the quiet hush during a sacred performance. These were moments of collective experience that transcended the rigid social boundaries. It was a universal language, capable of uniting, moving, and sometimes even subtly dividing. The echoes of medieval song, though often lost to time and poorly recorded by modern notation, continue to fascinate us. They remind us that history was not just a series of dates and battles, but a living, breathing experience filled with the universal human emotions that music so powerfully conveys. It was a world where a haunting melody could speak of forgotten loves, a rousing tune could inspire courage, and a simple song could carry a secret from one heart to another across a crowded, watchful room. The very air of the medieval court hummed with these unspoken truths, carried on the wings of instruments and voices, a vibrant testimony to lives both public and profoundly private. A symphony of duty desire and the enduring human spirit. And so in a world where unseen poisons could kill and silent arts could persuade, where public duty clashed with private longing, medieval people sought to understand a force far grander and more silent than any earthly symphony fate itself. For them, the future wasn't just a blank page, it was a cosmic scroll, its narrative written in the stars influencing every earthly event. This pervasive belief in the power of celestial bodies to dictate fortune, health, and even love meant that astrology, far from being a fringe, mysticism was a deeply respected, often crucial discipline, woven into the very fabric of daily medieval life. This wasn't just hocus pocus for charlatans in pointed hats and velvet robes. Oh no, astrology was serious business. The science of the stars as legitimate as medicine or law in the medieval mind. It was intertwined with astronomy, which observed the movements of heavenly bodies, and with philosophy, which sought to understand humanity's place in the universe. People genuinely believed that the alignment of planets at the moment of one's birth or at the start of a major undertaking could influence the outcome. Want to plant crops? Better check the moon phase. Planning a wedding. Consult the stars for an auspicious date. Thinking about going to war? The planets better be on your side, or you might as well pack it in. At the heart of this cosmic guidance were the court astrologers. These weren't mere fortune tellers. They were highly educated individuals, often trained in mathematics, astronomy, and classical texts. They were indispensable advisors to monarchs, dukes, and popes their counsel sought on matters of immense importance. Before a king declared war, embarked on a journey, or even planned a significant feast, the court astrologer might be consulted. Was the planetary alignment favorable for a military campaign? Would a royal marriage, if conducted on this specific day, ensure a fertile union and many sons? Their pronouncements could sway decisions affecting entire kingdoms, making them, in a very real sense, silent co-pilots of history. The power and influence of these astrologers were immense, but their position was a double-edged sword. If their predictions proved accurate, they were showered with riches and renown. But if their cosmic forecasts went awry, if a battle was lost despite their auspicious date, or a royal marriage remained barren against their starry guarantees, their heads might literally be on the line. It was like being a medieval meteorologist who, instead of predicting rain, was predicting wars, plagues, and royal marriages, with the added pressure that a wrong forecast might cost you your life. No wonder they spent so much time gazing upwards. They were looking for job security. Astrology influenced decisions both grand and intimate. For political decisions, astrologers cast horoscopes for battles, advising on the most propitious moment to attack or retreat. They calculated the best dates for coronations, believing that a king crowned under fortunate stars would have a prosperous and long reign. Treaties were often signed on specific astrologically approved days, hoping to imbue them with cosmic stability. Even the construction of castles or cathedrals might begin only after the stars had given their celestial nod of approval. In personal lives, astrology dictated more than just broad strokes. It could influence the choice of marriage partners, not just for dynastic reasons, but for cosmic compatibility. Charts were compared to see if two souls were destined to align. It played a significant role in medical practices, too. Medical astrology was common, linking specific body parts and ailments to planetary influences. A physician might not just look at your symptoms, but at your birth chart to determine the best course of treatment, or even the best time to bleed you, a popular medieval remedy, though often ineffective. Some even consulted the stars for less weighty matters, like choosing the best day to get a haircut or trim nails, believing it could affect one's health and fortune. It was the original life hack, with planets instead of apps. Beyond the formal scholarly practice of astrology, everyday medieval life was saturated with countless superstitions and omens. These were the folk beliefs, the whispers passed down through generations, often blending seamlessly with official religious doctrine and rudimentary scientific understanding. A comet streaking across the night sky was rarely just a celestial phenomenon. It was an omen, usually of disaster, a harbinger of war plague, or the death of a king. Eclipses, unusual weather patterns, or even the flight of birds could be interpreted as signs from the divine or the demonic, portending good fortune or imminent doom. People carried charms and amulets, believing they offered protection against evil, brought good luck, or even cured ailments. A rabbit's foot, a specific saint's relic, a carved piece of bone. These were not mere trinkets, but potent objects imbued with unseen power. The fear of curses and the belief in witchcraft were also very real. If a harvest failed or livestock died, mysteriously, suspicion might fall on a local witch casting malevolent spells. This constant awareness of unseen forces meant that magic, both good and bad, was a pervasive part of the medieval worldview. There was no clear dividing line between a miracle, a natural phenomenon, or a supernatural intervention. It was all part of the grand mysterious tapestry of existence. This pervasive blend of science, religion, and folklore meant that even the most powerful individuals, the kings and queens who ruled vast empires, were still subject to the perceived whims of cosmic influences. Their anxieties were magnified by the belief that their fate was preordained, or at least heavily influenced by forces beyond their control. Imagine being a king, burdened by the weight of an entire kingdom, and then having an astrologer declare that the stars predict your downfall. Talk about a cosmic kick in the pants. For courtiers, including our male favorites, their fortunes were not just in the hands of the king, but seemingly in the stars as well. A court astrologer's unfavorable prediction could spell their immediate dismissal, or worse, fuel accusations of ill luck or malevolent influence. Their already precarious existence was made even more tenuous by the fickle dance of the planets. They might try to curry favor with the astrologer, hoping for a more favorable reading, or consult their own secret diviners in hopes of influencing their cosmic forecast. In a world brimming with uncertainty, where life was often brutal and short, the human desire to understand and perhaps even control one's fate was overwhelming. Astrology and superstition offered a comforting, if often illusory, sense of order and predictability. They provided answers to inexplicable events and offered a glimmer of hope in the face of relentless hardship. They were the grand narrative, the ultimate explanation for why things happened, wrapping the chaotic dance of human ambition and desire in a vast, predetermined cosmic ballet. And in that dance, every life, from the lowliest peasant to the mightiest king, was merely a player on a stage whose movements were choreographed by the silent, relentless gaze of the stars. Even if the stars dictated the grand ballet of existence, there was another force at play, one far more earthly and equally fickle, that decided which dancers would be remembered and which would simply vanish into the wings' history itself. For all the careful record-keeping of battle successions and royal decrees, history, you see, is a bit like a finicky editor. It tends to favor the bold headlines, the major players, and the stories that fit neatly into its established narratives. The quiet lives, the unconventional affections, the politically inconvenient truths. Those often end up on the cutting room floor, swept away by time, or deliberately discarded. And it's here in these vanishing traces that we confront the profound challenge of understanding the human experience in the Middle Ages. The most profound challenge in reconstructing the lives of figures like our male concubine, or indeed many other marginalized or politically inconvenient individuals, is the sheer absence of explicit records. Official chroniclers, typically monks or court scribes, weren't exactly unbiased journalists. They were often paid by the very monarchs whose virtues they were extolling, or influenced by the prevailing moral winds of their monastic orders. Their job was to document what was deemed important and respectable, to uphold the official narrative of piety and legitimate power. A king's pious devotion. Absolutely. A queen's strategic marriage, of course. A king's beloved male favorite, whose existence might be seen as scandalous or illegitimate. In many circles, not a chance. Their lives were simply unwritten, their presence, a ghost in the grand narrative. This leads us directly to the biases of historical record-keeping. History, as the old saying goes, is written by the victors, but it's also written by the powerful, by the dominant culture, and by those who hold the pen. The perspectives of the defeated, the voiceless, or those who deviated from social norms were rarely given a platform. Imagine a medieval court chronicler carefully noting down the births, deaths, and marriages of the royal family. Would they risk their patronage, or even their life, by openly detailing an intimate relationship that went against the prevailing Christian morality, even if everyone at court knew about it? Unlikely. Instead, such relationships would be omitted, glossed over, or referred to with vague coded language that modern historians have to painstakingly decipher. It's like reading a recipe where half the ingredients are secret and the measurements are written in riddles. Furthermore, there was often a deliberate act of moralizing history. Later generations, looking back through the lens of their own evolving moral codes, sometimes actively rewrote or omitted elements that didn't fit their contemporary understanding of virtue or propriety. What might have been an open secret in one century could become an unmentionable scandal in the next, leading to the destruction of records or the careful editing of existing ones. For someone like a male favorite, whose very existence was tied to a power dynamic that might be condemned by future moralists, the safest form of record-keeping was no record at all. Their only trace might be in an enemy's scathing pamphlet or a rumor noted with disdain by a disapproving cleric, often skewed to serve a political or moral agenda. They lacked a voice of their own, unable to counter the narratives spun around them or to leave behind their own version of events. This brings us to the fragmented nature of the past. History is not a complete book, neatly bound and easily read from cover to cover. It's much more like a shattered mosaic, painstakingly reassembled from countless broken shards. We have surviving charters, legal documents, official letters, religious texts, and as we've discussed, illuminated manuscripts. But there are enormous frustrating gaps. Whole periods might be documented by only a handful of sources, leaving vast blank spaces where countless lives unfolded. Trying to understand the Middle Ages from its surviving records is like trying to reconstruct a priceless vase from a handful of scattered pieces. You can see the beauty, the general shape, but there are always immense, frustrating absences. The stories of individuals who were not kings, powerful nobles, or highly visible figures like senior clergy are particularly elusive. Their joys, their sorrows, their daily struggles, their secret loves, these were rarely deemed worthy of inscription on parchment. They lived, they breathed, they loved, they suffered, but the official historical record often remains utterly silent, leaving them as anonymous ripples in the vast ocean of time. But here's the marvelous thing. History is never truly finished. It's not a dusty tome closed forever, its pages sealed against new revelations. It's a living, breathing conversation constantly being re-examined and expanded. This is where the ongoing work of modern historians becomes so vital. They are the detectives of the past, meticulously sifting through every surviving fragment, cross-referencing seemingly unrelated documents, learning to read between the lines, and interpreting the subtle clues hidden in art music, and even the language of flowers. They uncover forgotten narratives by looking at unconventional sources, household inventories, minor legal disputes, marginalia in obscure books, even archaeological digs that unearth the physical remnants of daily life. The commitment to give a voice to the voiceless, to uncover the experiences of women peasants, minority groups, and those with unconventional relationships is a powerful driving force in contemporary historical scholarship. It's a bit like finding a lost treasure map and realizing the real treasure isn't gold, but a deeper, richer understanding of who we are and where we came from. Every newly discovered letter, Every reinterpreted artwork, every unearthed artifact, adds another tiny piece to the mosaic, gradually filling in those frustrating blanks. And so, as the final notes of our journey fade, leaving us with the echoes of medieval life, love, and fate, we're left with a profound appreciation for the whispers that survive, and a deeper understanding that history is not just about what was explicitly written, but about what was deliberately left out, what was silenced, and what was simply deemed too ordinary or too scandalous to merit inclusion. The very absence of these stories, particularly those of figures like the male concubine, tells us something profound about power society and the enduring human struggle to exist authentically within restrictive norms. Their invisibility paradoxically shines a light on the biases of the past and the continuous vital work of remembering. The silence, in its own way, speaks volumes, inviting us to keep listening for the untold stories forever lurking in the shadows of what we think we know.